Gui has worked on a difficult, oftentimes exhausting campaign to compel Chinese authorities to free her father. Lam's fellow bookseller Gui Minhai, a Swedish citizen originally from China.
I do think it makes a lot of sense for me to continue my advocacy here, as my father is a German permanent resident. He has family here, and he's lived here for many years. He owns property here.
Gui disappeared from another of his overseas properties on October the 17th, 2015. Closed-circuit TV footage shows him returning to his condominium in the Thai resort town of Pattaya. A man appears to be waiting for him. Gui then unloads his car before driving off again, marking the start of a bizarre saga that is still unfolding, being under the influence of alcohol 13 years ago.
这里我要向受害者家属表示我最诚挚的道歉，对不起。我知道我对他们造成的伤害那是和痛苦，那是没法弥补的。但是呢，我会尽我的有生之年来赎罪。
His daughter Angela spoke to 101 East shortly after Gui's first confession aired. Back then, for security reasons, we agreed not to show her face. We asked how she felt about her father's TV appearance.
I couldn't watch the whole thing because it was too emotionally overwhelming for me. But clearly, the bit that I saw seemed very scripted.
In October 2017, 2 years after Gui disappeared from Thailand, China's foreign ministry announced that he was a free man.
桂民海因交通肇事罪被判处的2年有期刑罚已经执行完毕，已经于2017年10月17日释放。中方已经及时地将情况通报了瑞典驻华使馆。
But 3 months later, the bookseller was in the news again. He'd been seized by plainclothes Chinese agents while on a train from Shanghai to Beijing. With him were 2 Swedish officials. Angela, who had been allowed regular Skype calls with her father in the months following his so-called release, says she now believes the Chinese government never meant to free him.
I got quite a clear sense that he had been tortured, for example, when he was detained. And he also did tell me that they did not, or the people, his friends, as it were, did not want him to leave China. He showed me a particular set of photographs taken of him sort of smiling and sort of doing the peace sign with his fingers on it on some sort of a Segway in a park. You know, and he told me that was taken by his friends, and the tone of voice in which he said that made it rather quite clear who these friends were, and I think that the setting of the image also very sort of heavily suggests that the image was produced as kind of evidence that he was having a good time.
He turned himself in to police in China.
Nearly 3 weeks after being seized from the train, Gui resurfaced, smiling and in seemingly good spirits as he took part in an alleged interview arranged by China's Ministry of Public Security. Chinese state media were invited to the event. Hong Kong's South China Morning Post, or SCMP, was also present at the so-called interview and released this video.
I think the SCMP handled this whole situation appallingly badly, and they continue to do so, I believe. They still haven't owned up to what they did, which was to uncritically participate in the circulation of propaganda.
In an email to the newspaper's editor-in-chief, Angela wrote, "The interview, a scripted point-by-point rebuttal of the criticism against China's treatment of my father, might as well have been a statement from the foreign ministry. you still decided to run the story, knowing these could not possibly be my father's own words. Why? Editor-in-Chief Tammy Tam replied to Angela, saying, "With regard to your father's case, I assure you categorically that we did not collaborate with the Chinese authorities to portray your father as speaking freely while in custody." The South China Morning Post declined our request for an interview, but in a statement said it was staunchly independent. We had to choose between meeting Gui in a stage-managed setting, it said, or having no access to him at all, and we made the decision to proceed based on news merit. Peter Darlin never wanted to be a prominent activist. For years, he kept a low profile, quietly working at the Beijing-based legal aid NGO he co-founded with Chinese lawyer Wang Chunjiang. But in the summer of 2015, authorities took Wang as part of what is now known as the 709 crackdown on lawyers and human rights activists. And then, 5 months later, they came for Darlin.
It was a massive operation. 15 to 20 state security officials that sort of came to my home in the evening, cameras rolling, lights on, and it was state security, not the police.
I have caused harm to the Chinese government. I have hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. I apologize sincerely for this.
While in detention, Darlin realized the only way out was to agree to a taped confession. He relented after spending days being watched around the clock by guards and enduring long interrogation sessions.
It was surreal. We literally had a scriptwriter. We had, the camera people, we had a director, then me and her, the CCTV journalist, as two actors, and literally just reading the line like a rehearsal, except you don't see the papers.
Since his deportation, Darlin has lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He's now preparing to leave Asia for good. We film only indoors, mindful that Gui Minhai disappeared while holidaying in this country, and of the fact that Darlin is still recovering from his ordeal.
I had pretty intense sort of PTSD-related symptoms to deal with when I first relocated here. Like my girlfriend disappears in the supermarket to go get something without telling me, and you'll have a minor freak out standing in the aisle, like what's going on.
In late December, scuffles break out outside a courthouse in the northern Chinese city of Tianjin as Darlin's former co-founder Wang Chunjiang's trial gets underway. He's been held without access to his family or lawyers for more than 3 years. The court hands him a 4.5-year sentence for subversion.
He is one of the few people that have refused to make a forced TV confession. He will choose to be tortured to death before submitting to something that he knows isn't wrong, like making a forced TV confession, admitting some kind of crime that he doesn't consider a crime.
Others swept up in the 709 crackdown appear to have buckled under pressure, though. In August 2016, one of China's most celebrated human rights lawyers appeared in at least 2 separate TV reports. Wang Yu said she was rejecting an award conferred on her by the American Bar Association.
他这种颁奖还是在利用我，抹黑中国政府和抹黑中国形象。
Wang Yu has since made clear she agreed to the so-called interviews for the sake of her son. The teenager was attempting to flee China when he was stopped at a border town in Myanmar. His father, Bao Longjun, says Chinese authorities used him as a bargaining chip.
还说，你不认罪，以后怎么能出去见到你儿子呢？甚至还跟王宇说过。 说你儿子满嘴的民主法治思想，你不好，你教育不了，我们来教育，这句话。
But what exactly is the aim of such confessions? Activist and academic Dr. Tang Biao believes that beyond intimidation and humiliation, they serve another purpose.
If I write down the promise, I read it in front of the camera, I lose face, and I would be criticized by other human rights activists, and I may lose my courage to continue my work.
Tang knows what it's like to butt heads with the Chinese government. He was once a human rights lawyer who took on some of China's most high-profile causes and legal cases. Tang was detained multiple times and now lives in exile in the United States. He says he too was filmed making a confession, but the footage never aired.
They kidnapped me and tortured me and forced me to confess. If they aired the video on CCTV or other official television, I would be humiliated very much, but they didn't.
So this photo, this was like, you know, our happiest moment, seeing our son finish his high school, get good IB grades and so on. And there we were celebrating that, and 2 weeks later we were arrested and thrown into jail.
Not all televised confessions involve critics of the Chinese government. Peter Humphrey and his wife ran a risk consultancy in Shanghai. In 2013, they were asked by pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline, or GSK, to conduct background checks on an employee. That same year, as authorities intensified a corruption probe into the drugs company, Humphrey and his wife were also arrested.
People were being arrested left, right and centre. I think they detained more than 40 people. Shortly after those raids began, GSK informed me that the person we had investigated for them was coming after us.
Weeks after his arrest, Humphrey appeared on Chinese state television. He's never gotten over the experience.
When they paraded me in front of the cameras for the first time in August of 2013, I had been held in conditions of great duress for virtually 2 months, almost 2 months.
Humphrey says he was given a sedative just before the so-called interview, then led into a cage and strapped into a chair.
I was very drowsy, but I was still trying to resist saying anything that would amount to confessing to a crime that I had never committed. But, you know, psychologically, what do you do when you're locked up as a caged animal in handcuffs, in a locked chair, in a locked cage, you know, even though you've never been convicted of a crime?
Humphrey and his wife spent nearly 2 years in prison after a court convicted them of illegally acquiring information. He developed cancer during his time behind bars and suffers from PTSD. But he's recovering and he still wants justice. Today, we're in Chiswick, London, looking for the new European headquarters of CGTN, the international arm of Chinese state broadcaster CCTV. We find the right building, but it's hard for Humphrey to be here for long.
But I tell you, when I'm doing something like this, I think any moment, I think someone's going to come and grab us.
Even here in the UK, you think that?
It's just the recurring nightmare from what I went through. You know, I stand here in my own country, breathing free air, fresh air, and, you know, I'm supposed to be free, but I still live this nightmare of what they did to me, and I'm standing outside, you know, a building which is soon going to be occupied by an organisation that assisted the police in doing that to me. This is the completed form.
The two Peters are joining forces.
You see the last page for the appendix list? Just make sure. Yeah.
Backed by Darlin's NGO, Safeguard Defenders, Humphrey is lodging a complaint against CNN and CCTV.
So have you got everything?
Yeah.
I have here a complaint to Ofcom, the British broadcasting regulator. I'm going to visit their office and hand it in to actually launch what I think is a significant complaint, a significant milestone on my efforts to win exoneration.
In his complaint, Humphrey accuses CCTV of working in active collaboration with the police of the Chinese state. His confessions, he says, were procured under conditions tantamount to torture. He concludes CCTV and CGTN should be denied licenses to broadcast in the UK for violating Ofcom's rules. Neither CCTV nor CGTN responded to our request for comment. But this is the Chinese government's reaction to Humphrey's complaint.
我们希望英方能够为外国的新闻媒体在英国开展正常的新闻报道工作提供支持和便利。我想新闻机构是促进各国人民相互理解和友好交流的桥梁和纽带。
In a written statement to 101 East, Chinese authorities also stated, China is a country ruled by law. The British citizen Peter Humphrey already pleaded guilty and showed repentance when he served the sentence, and he was released on June the 9th, 2015. Lam Wing-Ki, Peter Darlin and Angela Gui have also filed complaints to Ofcom.
我當時被認罪嘅強迫拍視頻嗰個經歷，我要寫翻個過程俾翻佢知。起碼譬如央視正電台喺英國係有可能被取消資格嘅。嗱呢個我都希望可以做得到。
He's lost his bookstore and his livelihood and says he still receives occasional threats. But Lam says it's worth the risk to draw attention to China's forced confessions.
Lost and abandoned. Found and saved. 101 East reveals how one charity is giving Pakistan's lost children a new chance at life. On Al Jazeera.
Business updates brought to you by Qatar Airways. Going places together. Business updates brought to you by Qatar Airways. Going places together.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. This is the Al Jazeera News Hour, live from Doha, coming up in the next 60 minutes. The push to get aid into Venezuela, tensions near the Colombian border as President Maduro cuts off Brazil. 25 years on, the massacre at a mosque in Hebron remains a flashpoint of Israeli-Palestinian tensions. One day to go before Nigeria's highly anticipated presidential election after it was postponed a week ago. And why people may be tuning into this year's Oscars for other reasons than to see the Best Film Awards.
And in sports, Steph Curry puts in another standout performance for the reigning NBA champions. Curry even surprised himself with the six-time All-Star, inspires another Golden State win.
Hello, we begin this news hour in Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro is now upping the ante in his attempt to stop US aid from getting into his country. He shut the border with Brazil on Thursday and says he's considering doing the same with Colombia. Well, there, volunteers are trying to get the first delivery into Venezuela by Saturday, but the army is blocking them. Our Latin America editor, Lucia Newman, reports from San Antonio on the Venezuela-Colombia border.
Pretending that humanitarian aid is not going to reach Venezuela is an act of cruelty.
As opposition leaders slowly make their 800-kilometer journey to the border, the binational bridge that joins Colombia and Venezuela is quickly becoming the stage for a bizarre duel. On the Colombian side, a Venezuela Aid Live concert with world-famous pop stars in support of Venezuela's opposition movement. And, not to be outdone, on the other side, a hands-off Venezuela concert called by embattled President Nicolás Maduro, both scheduled to get underway in unison on Friday. As you can see, the stage on the Venezuelan side of the bridge is almost ready for the battle of the bands. But this dueling music event is framing a bigger battle over who is going to take credit for providing food and medicine for Venezuelans desperately in need. President Maduro insists he can provide for his countrymen and says shipments of medicine from Russia and China have just arrived. To prevent opponents from attempting to bring in stockpile supplies from neighboring Brazil, he's ordered the border sealed until further notice. But so far here in Táchira, the border with Colombia remains open, and thousands of volunteers have been crossing into Cúcuta. They say they're preparing to confront the armed forces to bring food and medicine back into Venezuela on Saturday, when Guaidó gives the word.
We know the government has blocked the bridge with containers, but we're here to make it possible to bring in that humanitarian aid by whatever means necessary.
Guaidó says he'll be bringing the supplies across 4 bridges here in Táchira, as well as 2 ports in northern Venezuela. Exactly how the US-backed opposition plans to do it without being stopped is still a mystery. And that's exactly what's raising the suspense and the tension on both sides of the border. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, San Antonio, Venezuela.
Well, Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoon has been following events from Brazil since the border with Venezuela was shut and sent this report from Boa Vista.
Now that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has closed Venezuela's border with Brazil, the question is, what exactly is Brazil going to do next? We've heard for the past 48 hours that Brazil is going forward with a plan in which aid comprised of medical supplies and foodstuffs will be delivered to Brazil's border with Venezuela, at which point a convoy from Venezuela will cross into Brazil. We're told this would happen on Saturday, February 23rd, would pick up that aid and would then take it back into Venezuela for distribution. Now, the question becomes, is this process going to get a lot more complicated going forward? At this point, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. When exactly is that aid going to get here, Boa Vista, which is the capital of northern Roraima state? How exactly is that aid then going to be transported to the border, to the town of Pacaraima, which is right on Brazil's border with Venezuela? It's the main entry point for Venezuelan refugees and migrants who have been crossing into Brazil. And what exactly is going to happen after that? Nonetheless, officials here reiterating, as they have over the past few days, that this plan will go ahead. We expect we will be hearing more specifics in the hours to come.
Well, Al Jazeera had a chance to speak to Brazil's vice president after Venezuela made that announcement. He said Brazil will help its neighbour, but won't be crossing the line.
We're not going to trespass the border, okay? What we can do, we can put supplies on our border, and if the Venezuelans want, they can come and get it. But I don't think this will work, okay? Because, you see, from Roraima until the Orinoco River, it's almost 1,000 kilometers. And all this is an empty space in Venezuela. So there is not enough population there to come to Brazil and to reach for supplies, okay? I think that the main points for these humanitarian aids would be the ports and also the border with Colombia.
Now, Palestinians are preparing for demonstrations to mark 25 years since a mass shooting inside a mosque in Hebron in the occupied West Bank. 29 Palestinians were shot dead as they prayed by a far-right settler. This year's protests are happening as Israel's Prime Minister seeks support from far-right groups ahead of elections in April. Here's Harry Fawcett.
It's early morning on a hill above Hebron's old city, and a group of Palestinian activists is on the move. Their mission, they say, to escort children safely to school through the city's divided streets. But their approach is barred by Israeli soldiers. The army has declared the area a military exclusion zone, off limits to non-residents. The activists say it's to prevent them recording and drawing attention to instances like this, filmed a few days earlier when they were confronted by Israeli settlers.
Documentation is the most important. Everyday attacks happen here. But how can you show them to the world? If we go in the future to the ICC and statistics that we have for the future, if we're talking about attacking kids in the UN, we have to come up with the statistics.
Until last month, such documentation had been the job of observers from the Temporary International Presence in Hebron, or TIPH. Its 25-year presence in the city, reporting on violence and human rights violations, was brought to an end by the Israeli Prime Minister, who accused the monitors of working against Israel. TIPH's mission began in the aftermath of the massacre in 1994 of 29 Palestinian worshippers inside the Ibrahimi Mosque. Husni Rajabi was praying that day near the front when an American-Israeli settler opened fire from the back of the room.
I think about it all the time. I was tripping over people lying on the floor, the dead, the wounded, calling for help. It's an unforgettable tragedy.
The gunman, Baruch Goldstein, was a follower of the far-right Jewish rabbi and politician Meir Kahane, whose party was banned as racist in the 1980s. Now, days before the massacre anniversary, the Israeli Prime Minister has pushed for a current-day Kahanist party, which